Do not sign that contract. The whisper was so soft it almost disappeared beneath the low hum of the crystal chandeliers, yet Ethan Whitmore's hand stopped an inch above the paper. Around the polished walnut table, 12 executives exchanged puzzled looks before one of them laughed. Did the Maid just interrupt a $4 billion negotiation? Heat from the ceiling lights shimmered across the marble floor as Maya Williams stood frozen beside a silver tray of sparkling water, her black uniform perfectly pressed, her fingers steady even while every eye in the room landed on her. A white attorney smirked and adjusted his gold cuff links. Stay where you belong. Quiet chuckles spread through the room like ripples across glass. Maya lowered her eyes for one heartbeat, listening instead of reacting. She could still hear the Italian conversation she had overheard seconds earlier outside the conference room. The words echoed with perfect clarity, hidden behind confident smiles and expensive suits. Ethan finally looked at her, irritation sharpening his blue eyes. You speak Italian? His voice was calm, but the question cut through the silence. Maya nodded once. Enough to know they changed the meaning. Someone near the windows scoffed. Another executive rolled his chair back, already reaching for his phone as if the entertainment had started. The city skyline glowed behind them, afternoon sunlight bouncing off towers of steel and glass while the air conditioning whispered through hidden vents. Maya could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, but her breathing stayed slow. She had spent years becoming invisible, cleaning offices after midnight, polishing tables where decisions shaped fortunes she would never touch. Invisible people learned to listen. Across the table, one of the Italian partners casually straightened his tie, but his jaw tightened for the smallest fraction of a second. Maya noticed. Ethan noticed Maya noticing. The billionaire picked up the contract again. Thick paper brushed against his fingers with a dry whisper. Tell me exactly what you heard. The attorney leaned forward before she could answer. Sir, this is absurd. She serves coffee. A few executives nodded immediately, relieved to dismiss her. Maya met Ethan's eyes instead. Page 17. Paragraph 4. The English version says partnership. The Italian version says permanent controlling authority. The room stopped moving. Even the faint clicking of keyboards outside the glass walls seemed to vanish. One investor slowly removed his glasses. Another reached for a glass of water and missed it by an inch. Ethan flipped through the contract, page after page, the sound growing louder with every turn. Sunlight reflected across the silver pen beside his hand, flashing into Maya's eyes. No one laughed anymore. The attorney leaned closer, confident until his expression began to stiffen. Ethan's fingers stopped on a single paragraph. His eyes scanned one line, then another. The muscles in his jaw tightened. Across the table, the oldest Italian executive quietly slipped his phone beneath the folder and pressed one button without looking down. Maya saw the tiny green light appear, and a cold certainty settled in her chest. Whatever was hidden inside that contract was only the beginning. Then Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward her and asked, almost under his breath, Who taught you this dialect? The silence stretched so long that the air conditioner became the loudest thing in the room. Ethan Whitmore never looked away from page 17. His thumb rested against the edge of the paper while the sunlight sliding through the glass tower painted sharp lines across his face. Translate it, he said quietly. The white attorney forced a laugh that sounded thinner than before. Sir, this is an expensive negotiation, not a language class. Maya swallowed once. Her black shoes stood perfectly still on the polished marble, while every executive remained seated above her, watching as if she had wandered into the wrong world. She spoke one sentence in Italian. Then another. Slow. Precise. The room changed. One investor suddenly reached for his folder and snapped it shut. Another loosened his tie. The attorney grabbed the contract from Ethan and scanned the paragraph himself. Color drained from his face. Ethan extended his hand without saying a word. The attorney hesitated before returning the document. Across the room, a coffee machine hissed, filling the silence with steam that curled into the bright afternoon light. Maya noticed tiny details the others missed. The oldest Italian partner stopped tapping his watch. The youngest stopped smiling altogether. Ethan lifted his eyes. You said they changed the meaning? Why? Maya answered without emotion. Because partnership sounds fair. Permanent controlling authority sounds permanent. Nobody moved. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a helicopter drifted across the skyline, its distant blades vibrating through the glass. Inside, a single bead of sweat rolled down the attorney's temple. She is guessing, he insisted, his voice suddenly louder than necessary. Maya slowly shook her head. No. I recognize the regional phrasing. It is not standard Italian. It comes from the village near Bari. Every head turned toward the investors. One of them blinked twice. Ethan noticed. His expression hardened. How would a hotel maid know that? Maya looked at the silver water pitcher still resting in her hands. The polished surface reflected the room upside down, powerful people appearing strangely small. My grandmother was born there, she replied. She never allowed me to answer in English at home. The oldest investor leaned back so quickly that his leather chair groaned across the floor. For the first time since the meeting began, uncertainty reached his eyes. Ethan closed the contract and stood. Chairs scraped softly as everyone else followed by instinct. Nobody invited Maya to sit. Nobody apologized. Yet every glance now carried something different. Respect mixed with fear. The attorney tried one last time. Sir, we can clarify the wording later. Ethan ignored him. His attention stayed on Maya. Tell me every word you heard outside this room. Before she could answer, a vibration echoed across the conference table. One phone. Then another. Then a third. The oldest investor glanced at his screen and every trace of confidence vanished. Without warning, he whispered 3 words in Italian that made Maya's fingers tighten around the silver pitcher. Ethan watched her face change for the first time and quietly asked, What did he just say? The oldest investor lowered his phone so slowly that the reflection of the chandelier trembled across the screen. Maya did not blink. He said, Destroy every copy? The words landed like cold rain inside the glass tower. Nobody breathed. The white attorney forced a smile that no longer reached his eyes. That is impossible. Ethan held out his hand. Your phone. The investor remained seated. His fingers tightened around the device until his knuckles turned pale. The city traffic 30 floors below faded beneath the soft mechanical hum of the ventilation system. Maya heard something else instead. A notification sound. One sharp vibration. Then another. Tiny. Urgent. The attorney suddenly stepped between Ethan and the investors. This meeting is over. His polished shoes scraped across the marble, echoing through the silent room. Maya watched his left wrist. A bead of sweat rolled beneath his expensive watch despite the cool air. She had seen that look before. People wore it when they realized the truth had arrived too early. Ethan slowly turned toward her. You noticed something else. It was not a question. Maya nodded once. They stopped arguing 5 minutes ago. Now they are waiting. One executive frowned. Waiting for what? Maya looked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sunlight flashed across the neighboring skyscraper and reflected onto the conference table like moving water. Down on the street, 3 identical black SUVs rolled to a stop in perfect formation. Their engines continued idling. Nobody stepped out. The youngest Italian investor quietly closed his eyes. The attorney reached for the contract, but Ethan placed one hand on it first. Nobody touches this document. The command froze the room again. Maya noticed several phones lighting up at the same time. Silent messages. No sounds. Only glowing screens and changing expressions. The oldest investor finally stood. His chair slid backward with a slow metallic groan. Mr. Whitmore, perhaps we should continue another day. Ethan did not move. Sit down. The investor hesitated. For the first time all afternoon, the billionaire was the only person in the room who looked completely calm. Maya shifted the silver water pitcher onto the table. The polished metal reflected everyone's faces, stretching them into strange shapes. She saw something nobody else could see. The attorney had quietly slipped a folded sheet of paper beneath his leather portfolio. Her eyes narrowed. It was page 17. The original page 17. While everyone watched the investors, someone inside the room had switched the contract. Maya stepped forward. Every expensive suit turned toward the maid again. The attorney laughed, louder than necessary. Please do not tell me the cleaning staff wants to negotiate now. A few nervous chuckles followed, but they died almost instantly. Maya pointed at the contract without touching it. That is not the same paper. Ethan looked down. The attorney shrugged. Paper is paper. Maya shook her head. No. 15 minutes ago there was a coffee stain in the bottom corner. I wiped the table myself. This page is clean. Absolute silence swallowed the room. Ethan slowly lifted the contract into the light. Every eye followed the corner of page 17. White. Perfect. Untouched. The attorney stopped breathing. At that exact moment, the conference room doors opened without a knock, and a silver-haired woman wearing a security badge walked inside, looked directly at Maya, and quietly said, Miss Williams, we finally found your old personnel file. Mr. Whitmore needs to see who you really are. The silver-haired security director placed a thin manila folder on the conference table, and the sound of cardboard against polished wood seemed louder than the traffic 30 floors below. Every executive stared at the label. Maya Williams. The white attorney laughed first, but it came out strained. Are we really stopping a $4 billion deal for a hotel maid's employee file? Ethan did not answer. He opened it. Cold light from the ceiling reflected across a metal paper clip as the first page slid free. Housekeeping application. Temporary contract. Background verification. Then his hand stopped. A language certification stamped with 3 international seals. Italian. Arabic. French. Native level. The attorney leaned forward so quickly that his chair rolled backward with a sharp squeal. Those could be copies. Maya remained perfectly still beside the water station, her hands folded, her breathing slow, while whispers spread around the room like electricity. Someone quietly activated a phone camera beneath the table. The tiny red recording light blinked once. Ethan turned another page. International Risk Analysis Fellowship. European Commercial Arbitration Program. Academic Honors. The billionaire slowly looked toward Maya, but before he could speak, the attorney slammed one palm against the table. The crystal glasses trembled. Then why is she cleaning hotel rooms? Every face turned toward Maya again. The question hung in the chilled air heavier than accusation. She lowered her eyes for a moment. Because hospitals do not accept diplomas as payment. Nobody replied. The ventilation system hummed overhead while sunlight slid across the silver water pitcher, throwing fractured reflections onto the ceiling. Ethan quietly picked up another document. Recommendation letters. Professors. Trade officials. Government advisors. Every signature belonged to someone whose name moved global markets. The oldest Italian investor suddenly stood. This meeting cannot continue. His voice carried a tension that had not existed before. The attorney nodded immediately. Exactly. We have wasted enough time. Maya finally looked directly at Ethan. Do not let him leave. Her words were calm, almost gentle, yet every heartbeat inside the room seemed to stop. The attorney scoffed. On whose authority? Maya glanced toward the window. The 3 black SUVs were gone. In their place sat 2 unmarked federal vehicles with flashing white lights hidden behind dark windshields. One executive quietly walked closer to the glass. Who are they? Nobody answered. Ethan's phone vibrated once. Then again. He read the message without changing expression, but the color slowly disappeared from his face. The sender was his internal compliance office. Subject: Emergency Asset Freeze Review. Estimated exposure: $4.3 billion. The attorney reached for the folder again. Ethan closed it before his fingers arrived. You are staying. The attorney forced a smile. You cannot order me. Maya noticed something no one else did. His polished shoe tapped the marble floor every 3 seconds. Nervous rhythm. Escape rhythm. She had watched anxious guests for years while cleaning empty conference rooms after midnight. She knew exactly what panic looked like. Soft footsteps echoed outside. One pair. Then several more. The whispering beyond the glass walls suddenly stopped. Even the reception staff stood frozen. The conference doors opened slowly, and a woman wearing a federal identification badge stepped inside carrying a sealed evidence case. Her eyes skipped every executive and settled on Maya with unmistakable recognition. Then she turned toward Ethan and quietly said, Sir, before anyone leaves this room, there is one recording you need to hear. It was made by your late father exactly 6 years ago. The federal agent slid a small recorder onto the polished table, and the tiny red light blinked once like a heartbeat fighting to survive. Every phone camera in the room tilted toward it. The air conditioning hummed overhead, but nobody seemed to feel the cold anymore. Ethan Whitmore stared at the device while his reflection shook faintly across the silver water pitcher. The recording crackled. An older man's voice filled the room, calm and unmistakable. If you are hearing this, trust the woman named Maya Williams before you trust anyone sitting at this table. The silence that followed was so complete that the distant elevator bell echoed through the glass walls. Every executive slowly turned toward the black maid standing beside the coffee station. The white attorney laughed too quickly. Anybody can fake a recording. The federal agent did not react. She placed the sealed document beside the recorder. Certified authentication. Digital verification. Witness signatures. Ethan picked it up with fingers that no longer looked steady. Across the room, one investor quietly lowered his phone. Another removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Maya remained motionless, her posture calm while pressure closed around her from every direction. Then the attorney pointed directly at her. This has been planned from the beginning. She planted doubt, manipulated the meeting, and now conveniently appears in an old recording. Several executives exchanged uncertain glances. Doubt spread faster than truth. Maya could almost hear it moving through the room like static electricity. The attorney stepped closer, polished shoes striking the marble with controlled confidence. Tell everyone why you disappeared from finance. Tell them why nobody hired you. Ethan looked at Maya for the first time without authority, only expectation. She lowered her gaze toward her folded hands. A faint scar crossed her wrist, barely visible beneath the conference room lights. Because I reported fraud. Nobody moved. She continued quietly. The investigation lasted 3 years. Every company that wanted to hire me received anonymous warnings that I was impossible to work with. The attorney smiled. Convenient story. Maya nodded once. It destroyed my career anyway. Outside the windows, thunderclouds rolled over the skyline, turning bright afternoon into steel-gray twilight. The room seemed smaller now, tighter, every breath heavier than the last. Ethan opened another page from her personnel file. A single newspaper clipping slipped onto the table. International analyst refuses to alter risk report. Company collapses weeks later. He read the headline twice. The date stopped him cold. 6 years ago. The same year his father died. His pulse became visible in his neck. The attorney suddenly reached for the clipping, but the federal agent calmly placed one finger on the paper first. Do not! Her voice never rose. The investors watched in complete silence. The balance of power had shifted, yet nobody knew where it would land. Maya slowly lifted her eyes toward the conference windows. Rain began striking the glass in soft, uneven rhythms. She noticed flashing lights reflecting across the wet streets far below. More black vehicles were arriving. She counted 1, then 3, then 6. Ethan followed her gaze. Who are they here for? The federal agent answered without looking away from the evidence case. That depends on what happens in the next 60 seconds. Before anyone could speak again, the building lights flickered once. Every screen inside the conference room went black. A second later, they all came back to life at the same time, displaying a single security video feed from 6 years earlier. The first frame appeared, and Ethan instantly recognized the younger version of himself standing beside his father while, in the background, a young woman carrying a stack of financial reports turned toward the camera. It was Maya. Nobody spoke. The security footage flickered across every screen, washing the conference room in pale blue light that reflected off polished metal, crystal glasses, and silent faces. The steady hum of the ventilation system seemed to fade until the only sound left was the soft vibration of forgotten phones resting on the table. Ethan Whitmore stared at the younger version of himself frozen beside his father while, in the corner of the frame, Maya quietly handed over a stack of financial reports before disappearing from view. She did not look important. She looked invisible. The white attorney folded his arms tighter. A coincidence. His voice was lower now, stripped of certainty. No one answered him. Rain slid down the glass walls in slow silver lines, blurring the skyline into streaks of gray and white. The federal agent touched the screen once. The recording continued. Ethan's late father accepted the reports without opening them. Instead, he looked directly at Maya and nodded with unmistakable respect. The gesture lasted less than 2 seconds, yet every investor noticed it. Ethan noticed it most. His breathing slowed. His shoulders, tense all afternoon, seemed strangely heavier. Maya remained beside the water station, hands resting lightly against the cool steel cart, her expression calm enough to make the silence uncomfortable. She had nothing to prove anymore, yet everyone wanted her to explain the impossible. The attorney broke first. If she was so valuable, why did nobody remember her? Maya answered without looking at him. Because people remember titles before they remember truth. The words were quiet, almost swallowed by the distant roll of thunder, but they settled over the room with impossible weight. Nobody argued. One executive slowly lowered his expensive fountain pen onto the table. Another quietly stopped recording with his phone. Across the polished floor, the oldest Italian investor removed his watch and placed it beside his folder, as though time itself had stopped mattering. Ethan finally stepped closer to the screen. His reflection merged with the younger man standing beside his father until the two versions seemed to occupy the same space. He noticed something no one else had mentioned. His father was not looking at the reports. He was looking at Maya, waiting. Waiting for her approval. Ethan turned slowly. Did you warn him? Maya nodded once. 3 times. And he listened? Her eyes drifted toward the rain-covered windows. Most of the time. The room grew even quieter. Somewhere deep inside the building, an elevator motor groaned before settling into silence. A coffee machine finished its cycle with a gentle click. Tiny, ordinary sounds suddenly felt enormous. The attorney reached for his briefcase, then stopped when he realized every investor was watching him instead of Maya. Confidence slipped from his face almost imperceptibly. For the first time, he looked like the outsider. Ethan noticed it too. The billionaire's fingers brushed the edge of the old newspaper clipping still lying on the table. A single raindrop struck the window hard enough to make several executives glance outside. More federal vehicles had arrived. Their headlights glowed through the storm without flashing, patient and unmoving. Nobody entered. Nobody left. The waiting was somehow worse than action. Maya quietly lifted the silver water pitcher and refilled the empty glass nearest Ethan without being asked. The soft sound of water echoed through the room. Ethan looked at the glass, then at Maya, and something inside his expression changed from suspicion to memory. Very slowly he whispered, "You were there the day my father cancelled the merger." Maya met his eyes for the first time since the meeting began. "No," she replied with frightening calm. "I was there the day he found the second contract." Every head turned toward the sealed evidence case resting beside the federal agent. She slowly unclipped the metal lock, revealing another thick folder marked in faded black ink with only 4 handwritten words: Original Agreement. Do not destroy. The metal latch clicked open with a sound so sharp that every whisper died instantly. The federal agent lifted the faded folder onto the conference table, while cold ceiling lights reflected across its worn edges like frost on steel. Nobody reached for it. Nobody breathed. Ethan Whitmore stared at the handwritten words until his own reflection blurred in the polished wood beneath him. Maya remained beside the silver water cart, shoulders relaxed, hands still, as if she had already lived through this moment years ago. The attorney finally broke the silence. "Old paper proves nothing." His voice echoed too loudly in the motionless room. The federal agent slid the first document across the table. Original merger agreement. Initialed by Ethan's late father. Every executive leaned forward. Ethan picked it up with slow, careful fingers. His eyes moved across the paragraphs until they stopped on one sentence highlighted in blue ink. The language was different. Partnership. Shared authority. Mutual protection. Nothing like the version waiting for his signature only minutes earlier. Rain tapped softly against the glass as a phone camera zoomed closer, capturing every change in Ethan's face. The youngest investor swallowed hard. The oldest quietly removed his company pin and slipped it into his pocket. Maya said nothing. She simply watched the pages turn. Ethan found another sheet clipped beneath the agreement. A handwritten note from his father. The ink had faded, but every word remained clear. If Maya Williams ever warns you about a contract, stop listening to everyone else and listen to her first. The billionaire read the sentence twice. Then a third time. The attorney stepped forward, forcing confidence into his posture. Anyone could write that. Maya gently lifted her eyes. Look at the signature. Ethan did. His father had always crossed the final letter of his last name with a longer stroke than normal, a tiny habit known only to family and longtime colleagues. The mark was there. Perfect. Authentic. Across the room, a woman from the investment board quietly lowered her tablet. Another executive slowly stood up, not to leave, but out of respect for the maid nobody had acknowledged an hour earlier. The balance inside the room shifted so completely that even the air felt different. Ethan looked at Maya with an expression no one had ever seen from him before. Not authority. Not suspicion. Trust. The attorney sensed it immediately. Sweat gathered beneath his collar despite the chilled air. This changes nothing, he insisted, but his words landed without weight. Maya calmly stepped closer to the table for the first time. The polished marble reflected her black shoes beside $1,000 leather loafers. She pointed to the final page without touching it. There is still one problem. Every eye followed her finger. The signatures are correct, she said softly, but the witness seal is missing. The oldest Italian investor closed his eyes. The federal agent slowly smiled. Ethan frowned. Why does that matter? Maya answered with frightening calm. Because without the original witness seal, someone inside this room could still claim the real agreement never existed. Silence crashed over the executives again. Outside, the storm intensified, headlights shimmering through sheets of rain. Then a low electronic chime echoed from the evidence case. The federal agent reached inside and removed a small silver flash drive labeled only with today's date. She looked directly at Ethan before placing it beside the original contract. There is one last file, she whispered, and it identifies exactly who replaced page 17 6 years ago. The attorney's hand, steady all afternoon, finally began to shake. The silver flash drive rested in the center of the conference table like a single drop of rain before a storm, untouched yet impossible to ignore. Nobody reached for it. Nobody even blinked. The only movement came from the soft glow of phone cameras still recording and the faint vibration of idle elevators somewhere deep inside the building. Ethan Whitmore looked from the drive to Maya, then back again. The anger that had sharpened his face all afternoon had disappeared, replaced by something far heavier. Regret. The federal agent connected the drive to a secure tablet without a word. A progress bar crossed the screen while cold ceiling lights reflected in every pair of anxious eyes. The attorney lowered his gaze for the first time. His polished shoes no longer tapped against the marble. His hands rested motionless beside his briefcase. The video opened without sound. Grainy security footage filled the display. 6 years earlier. The same conference room. The same long table. Ethan's father sat at the head, while a younger Maya quietly entered carrying 2 identical folders. She placed one in front of him and stepped back without expecting recognition. Then another figure appeared. The attorney. He waited until Maya left the room, looked over both shoulders, calmly exchanged page 17, and slipped the original into his leather portfolio. Nobody in the present room moved. The silence became almost physical. One investor slowly removed his glasses and closed them in his hand. Another executive quietly stopped recording, realizing history had already captured enough. Ethan stared at the screen until it faded to black. He did not look at the attorney. He looked at Maya. She remained exactly where she had stood from the beginning, beside the silver water cart, the reflection of crystal lights shimmering across the polished metal beside her. She had not interrupted. She had not celebrated. She had simply waited for the truth to arrive on its own. Ethan stepped away from the head of the table and crossed the room. Every expensive shoe remained planted in place while his echoed softly across the marble floor. He stopped in front of Maya, leaving barely 3 feet between them. She lifted her eyes, calm and unreadable. The billionaire spoke so quietly that everyone leaned forward to hear. "I never asked your name." Maya smiled gently. "No, sir." The simple answer carried more weight than any accusation. Ethan lowered his head for a brief moment, an almost invisible gesture that transformed the atmosphere inside the room. The executives who had laughed at her now avoided her gaze. The oldest Italian investor stood and carefully extended his hand toward Maya before anyone else could react. "Miss Williams," he said, "today you protected people who did not deserve your trust." Maya accepted the handshake with quiet dignity. Nothing more. No speech. No victory. The attorney remained frozen, surrounded by silence instead of allies. Even the federal agent watched Maya with unexpected respect. Outside, the rain eased into a gentle mist, leaving silver trails across the glass tower, while late afternoon sunlight slowly returned through the clouds. The room seemed brighter, though no light had changed. Ethan reached toward the conference chair reserved for the chief negotiator and pulled it back. Every eye followed the movement. He did not sit. Instead, he looked at Maya. "This seat should have been yours years ago." Nobody objected. Nobody laughed. Maya glanced at the chair, then toward the windows where the city stretched endlessly beneath a clearing sky. Her fingers brushed the worn employee badge still hanging from her uniform. The badge reflected one last beam of light before she quietly unclipped it and placed it beside the untouched glass of water. The tiny plastic card landed with the softest click, yet every person in the room turned toward it, understanding that something far greater than a meeting had just come to an end. The employee badge rested beside the untouched glass of water, its plastic surface catching the last amber light spilling through the rain-washed windows. Nobody reached for it. Nobody dared disturb the silence that had finally replaced hours of pride, suspicion, and quiet humiliation. The air conditioning had slowed to a faint whisper, blending with the distant rhythm of traffic returning to the city below. One by one, phone cameras lowered until every screen went dark. There was nothing left to expose. Only something to remember. Ethan Whitmore stood beside the empty chair at the head of the table, his tailored jacket suddenly looking too heavy for his shoulders. He looked toward Maya, then toward the contract his father had once protected, and finally back to the simple housekeeping badge lying on polished walnut. The smallest objects sometimes carried the greatest truth. "Miss Williams," he said softly, his voice no longer carrying command but respect. "I almost trusted appearances more than honesty." Maya smiled, not with triumph but with quiet understanding. "Most people do." The words landed gently, yet every executive lowered their eyes as though they had been spoken directly to them. The oldest Italian investor closed his folder without signing a single page and slowly nodded toward Maya before walking away. One after another, expensive suits followed, their footsteps echoing across marble that suddenly felt less like a boardroom and more like a place where something invisible had finally been repaired. The federal agent gathered the evidence case and paused beside Maya. "You could return to finance tomorrow." Maya looked through the towering windows where sunlight pushed through the retreating clouds, turning the wet streets below into ribbons of gold. She glanced at the silver water cart she had guided through these halls every morning before anyone else arrived. "Maybe," she answered. "But today I already have everything I came here with." The agent looked confused until Maya gently tapped her chest. "Peace." Ethan quietly bent down and picked up the employee badge with both hands instead of one, handling it with the same care he had once reserved for billion-dollar contracts. He walked to the conference table and placed it beside the chair reserved for the chief negotiator. Nobody questioned the gesture. Nobody moved it. Hours earlier the badge had marked the person everyone ignored. Now it marked the place nobody else felt worthy to occupy. Maya adjusted the sleeve of her simple black uniform and turned toward the hallway. Her shoes made almost no sound against the polished floor. She did not hurry. She did not look back. Warm evening light stretched across the corridor, wrapping glass, steel, and stone in quiet gold while the scent of fresh rain drifted through the opening doors below. Ethan remained standing until she disappeared from view. Only then did he notice the small silver pitcher still sitting on the service cart. It reflected the room exactly as it was now, every powerful figure smaller than before and every empty space brighter than before. He reached for it, and found a folded napkin tucked beneath the handle. In neat handwriting were only 4 words. "Truth never needs permission." Ethan read them once, folded the napkin carefully, and slipped it into his jacket pocket where no contract had ever mattered more. Far down the hallway, Maya stepped into the fading sunlight, her silhouette dissolving into the glow until all that remained was the soft echo of her footsteps and the quiet certainty that kindness, dignity, and courage had walked out of the room carrying more power than money ever could.